Who can remember 1976? That's a really simple way to figure out who is over 40 and who is under 40. John, you'll obviously be putting your hand up, but there's plenty of others. Some of you will be like, 1976, it was like yesterday. And others are like, it was pretty much a lifetime ago, maybe even longer. Well, if you can remember 1976, you may remember that it was the disco era. And some of you are in very good voice this morning, which is great. Perhaps you may recall that this band was one of the biggest bands of the disco era, ABBA. And in 1976, they had one of their biggest hits. It was called Money, Money, Money. Now, I don't have any money to give you today, but I have a Morrow Gold chocolate bar if anybody would like to sing and dance. I've got to do both. This is a Morrow Gold. It's not just a normal Morrow. Anybody? I don't think so. I'll leave it up here just in case. But whether you like disco music or whether you loathe disco music, I just want you to hang in there a little bit for just a second so I can share with you a couple of the lyrics of the song. And I'm not going to sing it, but it's very interesting because you probably know it. It says, money, 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 must be funny. It's a rich man's world. I wonder what you think about that. Do you think it is a rich man's world? Well, Forbes magazine says that the richest man in the world currently at the moment is Bill Gates. You may recognise him. He's up there. He looks pretty happy. He would be very, very happy because his net worth is $75 billion. He set up Microsoft and it just keeps going and going and going. In fact, here's some facts about Bill Gates. He earns or makes around $20 million a day. If Bill Gates was walking down the street, which he probably doesn't, because he could drive anywhere he wants, but if he was walking down the street and he just happened to drop $1,000, it's not worth his time to bend down and pick it up, because in the time that he's bent down to pick it up, he's already made more than $1,000. Isn't that crazy? If he was a country, he would be the 37th richest country in the world. Anyway, Bill Gates is just kind of in another league, but there's some other wealthy people in the world. You may recognise this guy as well, Mark Zuckerberg. He set up Facebook, and his net worth is now around $45 billion, give or take a little bit. There's another guy, you may not recognise his name, but you may recognise his company, Jeff Bezos. He set up Amazon, and he's only at $44 billion, which really is pretty pathetic, really. Just to show you how astronomically huge these numbers are, let's say that you earn the average wage in New Zealand, which is $55,000 a year. Now, some of you will be more than that, some of you will be less than that, but that's the average wage for New Zealand, $55,000 per year. If you were to earn $55,000 per year, for you to get to $45 billion. We're not even talking Bill Gates, we're just talking Mark Zuckerberg, the Facebook guy. If you were to get to $45 billion, it would take you over 800,000 years. Now, I know that some of us do overtime, but that is ridiculous. But you know, you do not have to be Bill Gates. You don't even have to be Mark Zuckerberg to be rich. If you earn the average wage in New Zealand, $55,000, then that puts you in the top 1% of the world's richest people. 99% of the world's population is poorer than you if you earn $55,000 or more. So maybe ABBA was right. Maybe it is a rich man's world. It certainly is in the West anyway. That's kind of the society that we live in. And the underlying emphasis in our culture is that more is better. So marketers tell us that the more stuff we have, the better our lives will be, and the better we will feel about ourselves. Now, this is not a new phenomenon. People have been craving stuff for centuries. And several thousand years ago, there was a number of ancient writers who gave some warnings about the temptations of stuff. So I just want to share some of their ideas with you because they're collected in the Bible, and what they present is just It's just so different to what our society says. So let me read to you a couple. One of them is in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 verse 10, and this is what we read. Those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. Now, you may be aware that this was written by a guy called King Solomon. Now, his kingdom was the centre of the Middle East, around about 1,000 years before Christ. And as a king, he obviously received tribute from from the people that were subject to him. But he also had international trade. He also had business interests happening. So historians have estimated that in today's terms, taking into account inflation and everything, King Solomon's net worth would be $2 trillion. And yet, he writes this: how meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. Solomon could be, of all the people that has ever lived, Solomon could literally buy whatever he wanted. And he recognized that money doesn't bring happiness. There was another ancient writer, a guy called Paul, and he expanded on this idea in a letter to some of the first Christians, and he wrote this: we brought nothing with us when we come into the world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. But people who long to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. There's a couple, you've probably heard that before, so there's just a couple of things I want to quickly point out, because for a long time Christians have typically viewed money as a bad thing. And this idea is made popular during the medieval period. So you may know that monks and nuns, they chose to withdraw from the temptations of the world and set themselves up in a monastery or a nunnery. And in that monastery or in that nunnery, they would take a vow of poverty. And it just kind of came about in the culture that monks and nuns, in taking this vow of poverty, were idealized as super spiritual, as essentially the most committed Christians. Now I'm not trying to diminish the dedication of some amazing people in the past. But if you look closely at what Paul argues, he says that it's actually the love of money that is the cause of evil. It's not money itself. Money is actually neutral. It's not inherently good and it's not inherently bad. It depends on how we use it and what we seek from it. Plenty of people in the Bible were very, very wealthy. All of the patriarchs from Genesis, people like Abraham, like Isaac, like Jacob, they were very wealthy. We've talked about Solomon as kings, but there were other kings like David and Saul who had a huge amount of wealth. Boaz was a guy listed as a wealthy man. He had property, he had investments, he had business. In the Old Testament, in the New Testament, a number of the early Christian leaders were quite wealthy. There's a guy listed in Romans chapter 16 called Erastus. He was the treasurer of the city of Corinth. A very significant role, kind of like the chief financial officer for a very bustling metropolitan business city. So obviously a very well-paying role. Paul also had some wealthy patrons. Had a lady called Phoebe of Chira. She supported his missionary work, as did others. And a lot of these first Christians had large homes where they would have gatherings and meetings together. Gaius in Corinth and Lydia in Philippi, they welcomed the Christians into their large home and had space available for them. Some of the women who were close followers of Jesus also had significant wealth and status. A lady called Joanna, her husband was the manager of King Herod's business. And again, a significant role as well. other than God. The Bible calls that idolatry. Last week, Derek clearly pointed out that idolatry is not bowing down to a golden statue, but idolatry is honouring and valuing and pursuing created things rather than the Creator himself. This is something that we all do at different times in our life. And I believe that money is one of the biggest idols in our society today. It has been for a long time. So anyway, we're going to read Mark chapter 10, verse 17 to 22. As Jesus was starting out on his way to Jerusalem, a man came running up to him, knelt down and asked, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "Why do you call me good?" Jesus asked. "Only God is truly good. But to answer your question, you know the commands. You must not murder, you must not commit adultery, you must not steal, you must not testify falsely, you must not cheat anyone, honor your father and mother." "Teacher," the man replied, "I've obeyed all these commandments since I was young." Looking at the man, Jesus felt genuine love for him. "There is still one thing you haven't done. Go and sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." At this, the man's face fell, and he went away sad, for he had many possessions. This is just a fascinating encounter. It's also documented in Matthew 19 and Luke chapter 18. Perhaps it's one of the saddest stories of the gospel writers record. That this man leaves an encounter with Jesus worse. He had so much potential. He had manners, he had morals. Matthew tells us that he was young. Luke tells us that he was an influential leader among the people. This guy had it all. And he noticed that there's more to life than what he can see. So he asks Jesus, what must he do to inherit eternal life? I don't know if you noticed, but Jesus partially answers the question. He reminds him of the second half of the Ten Commandments, because Jesus is probably trying to determine the man's conduct, to figure out what he wants. And apparently he's pretty good. He's never murdered anybody. He's never had an adulterous affair. He's not stolen. He's not lied. He's not cheated. He's honoured his parents. He's said that he's obeyed all the commandments since he was young. And then Jesus looked. I don't know what type of look that would have been, but I guess it would have been one of those piercing, deep looks where Jesus just sees past the facade of the guy, and he cuts to the core of who the man really is. And looking at the man, Jesus felt genuine love for him. "There is still one thing you haven't done," he told him. "Go and sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." Now, Jesus' insight here goes beyond the superficial conduct. He drills down into the man's character, who the man really is on the inside. What I find curious about this encounter is that initially the man just seems so keen on spiritual matters. He runs up to Jesus. He's respectful of Jesus. He claims that he has a good moral track record, but when he is presented with the greatest invitation of his life, the opportunity to follow Jesus, he reveals what his God really is. Money is his God. He loved it, he trusted it, he obeyed it, and he worshipped it. And it's a sad story that Jesus offers the man the gift of eternal life and he turns it down. I suppose the truth is it is difficult to receive a gift when our fingers are wrapped around money and the things that it can buy. And so after the man walks away, Jesus turns to his disciples and he says this to him. Jesus looked around and said to his disciples, "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God." The disciples were astounded. Then who in the world can be saved? They asked. Jesus looked at them intently and said, humanly speaking, it is impossible, but not with God. Everything is possible with God. You notice here in verse 26, the disciples were astounded at what Jesus said. Where the thinking at the time was that wealth was evidence that God had a special blessing on a particular person. If you were wealthy, if you had a lot of money, then God had clearly been showing you his favour. That was what the people believed at the time. So I wonder if you can see this whole thinking still deceiving Christians today. There's some Christian churches around the world that get tangled up in a thing that's called prosperity theology. Essentially, this is the belief that God's will always be for financial abundance and physical well-being for Christians. That's why the prosperity theology movement is often called the health and wealth gospel. But when you read what Jesus says to his followers, it is the complete opposite of the prosperity theology. According to Jesus, it's very hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. It's not impossible if God is involved. If we're desperately honest, all of us sometimes have a tendency to hold our positions tightly. Perhaps that's why on another occasion Jesus said to the people around him, "Watch out! Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." So money is a very good servant. We can do great things with money. We can enjoy what money brings, but money is a really bad master. When we become enslaved to money, when we love it, when we trust it, when we obey it, when we worship it, when we hold tightly to our stuff, we're no different to that sad young man who turned away from Jesus. But there is another way to live. There is another way to make sure that money and our stuff does not become an idol that we worship. So flick over a few pages in your Bible to Luke chapter 19. We're going to read a very just short section of the story of Zacchaeus. You may remember that several weeks ago, Wayne shared a great message on the encounter Jesus had with Zacchaeus. And if you know this story, it's clear that after he met Jesus, Zacchaeus was a changed man. Just to give you a bit of background, Zacchaeus was the chief tax collector in the ancient city of Jericho. He was possibly the wealthiest man in the city, and he was probably the most hated man in the city. He had amassed a vast fortune through extortion and through coercion. He had sacrificed everything and everyone to get money. But then something changes in him when he hears that Jesus is in town. I don't know what it was. Perhaps Zacchaeus had a growing sense of the emptiness that materialism brings. Perhaps he had an awareness that he was made for more than just accumulating stuff. I don't know, but whatever it was, he disregards all dignity, he disregards all honour, and out of sheer desperation, he climbs a tree to see Jesus above the crowd. And this is where we pick up the story, Luke chapter 19, verse 5. When Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. "Zacchaeus," he said, "quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today." Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house in great excitement and joy, but the people were displeased. "He has gone to be a guest of a notorious sinner," they grumbled. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, "I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I have cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much." Zacchaeus knew that he wanted to follow Jesus, but he also knew that money was his idol. So to make sure that money was no longer his source of significance and security, Zacchaeus promises to give away half his wealth and to pay back those he's wronged 4 times as much. Now, I don't know if you've picked this, but this is incredible generosity. So he is giving away 50% of his income. That was far more than the Mosaic law required at the time. And he promises to pay back those he's wronged with 300% interest. You know, the law stipulated that he only had to pay back 120%. Zacchaeus did this because he knew that he had encountered radical grace. Jesus had poured out his spiritual riches for him. He had given Zacchaeus what money could not buy. Jesus brought forgiveness and freedom and fulfillment, and Zacchaeus was able to experience the joy of generosity, the joy of loving God rather than things. That's why at the end of this encounter, Jesus says, salvation has come to this house today. And notice that Jesus did not say, if you live like this, salvation will come. He said salvation has come. God's salvation does not come in response to a changed life. A changed life comes in response to salvation. If Zacchaeus had to earn his salvation, this is the question that he would be asking. To earn his salvation, he would say, how much must I give to pay back everything? But Zacchaeus understood that salvation came from the generous grace of God. So his question actually was, how much can I give? And when we grasp the reality of God's grace, when we truly experience the radical transformation that Jesus brings, when our heart and our minds and our hands are open to the love of God, when that happens, there's nothing short of a miracle. We are free to give. We are free to be generous. We are free to live the way that Jesus would have us live, because God has been infinitely generous to us. Now, right in the middle of a letter to the Christians in the city of Corinth, the Apostle Paul appeals to them to fulfill a financial pledge which they had made a year earlier. And he points out that Christians should be known for our generosity because we are reflecting the generosity of Jesus. So this is what he writes. You are familiar with the generosity of our Master Jesus Christ. Rich as he was, he gave it all away for us. In one stroke, he became poor and we became rich. There's Zacchaeus. He was familiar with the generosity of Jesus, and it changed him. He went from accumulating wealth to serving others with his Jesus focused his life, Zacchaeus focused his life on Jesus instead of money, and did it by giving away stuff. You love that story? Maybe you're more like Zacchaeus. Maybe you have been refreshed by God's generous grace, and you want to be generous over and above what is required. So maybe that means paying for the coffee, for the because he has been generous to us. That's why yesterday's light party in the park was such a great example of Christian generosity. The churches of Alexandria combined together to financially support and volunteer at the events, and the event was simply intended to bless our community. And people were blown away that it was a free event. They didn't have to pay for anything, and it was free because of the generous support of many of you. You gave a lot to it in terms of time, in terms of resources, in terms of finances, and I just want to say thanks. It's a privilege to be part of a church that looks beyond its walls and is willing to generously share with and serve people in our town. It was good. It was awesome. And I'm convinced that the way to counter this, the way to conquer the counterfeit God of money in our lives is to be generous with our wealth. Not to love it, not to trust it, not to obey it, not to worship it, but to give it away. And I believe that simple act helps root out the counterfeit God of money in our lives. It helps us love, and it helps us trust, and it helps us obey, and it helps us worship the one true God. It helps us experience God's generous grace and to find satisfaction and significance in Him. So, just to kind of sum it up here, that warning that the Apostle Paul gave against the love of money was a pretty clear warning, but he also gave an encouragement about how we could use our money, what it's there for. And so this is the rest of that section of 1 Timothy chapter 6. He writes this: true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. Teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. By doing this, they will be storing up their treasure as a good foundation for the future, so that they may experience true life. You know, this true life is the life that you are called to live. The life that loves, that trusts, that obeys, and that worships the one true God because of what He has done for us. Some of you may have heard of this guy called Winston Churchill, who's quite famous in this. He wants to make a living by what we get